Hello, hi everybody. How are you doing today? Welcome to week one of MGT 682, Critical Thinking and Decision Making. This is a 4-unit class. So today's our first day, and we're going to go over the syllabus, which is on the screen. We're going to go over the requirements for you in this course, and then we'll start on our week one lesson. This course has forum discussions, a presentation, and weekly assignments. Every week, we have discussions for you to answer, and you will upload them here on the Populi system. And the presentation will be due at the end of the term. You should be working on it every week, so you're not overwhelmed at the last minute. And then we have weekly assignments, which is 60% of your grade. All right, so let's look at the syllabus. You should have a copy of this in your Populi. You can download it if you like to. This is a Zoom course. And so these are recorded Zoom live sessions, but you're always welcome to log on to Populi and look at it at a later date. If you happen to miss class or you want to refresh the lessons that we learned for the day. The course here provides the tools and skills students need to examine and fully develop their analytical skills. It explores the critical thinking and decision-making process while providing students with concrete skills that help them identify and solve organizational problems and enhance their strategic thinking and decision-making abilities. Topics include problem identification, critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, and ethical implications. Don't forget Grace University's mission statement. Grace University exists to integrate Christian values into all academic experiences, therefore creating an educational community where its students learn to think and act as ethical leaders and responsible world citizens. Your program objectives for this program is for you to demonstrate ethical decision-making within the organization. 2, equip management competence within the cross-cultural and/or global organization. 3, synthesize the theories and practices presented in the program to develop solutions for specific material situations found within the organizational environment. 4, show competency in identifying conflicts within the organization and the ability to resolve them efficiently. So your course objectives here. Upon completing this course, students will be able to, 1, apply critical thinking to decision making. 2, analyze decision-making tools and their use. 3, describe and define critical thinking and explain the importance to the process of making decisions. 4, identify decision-making steps required to make decisions. 5, distinguish between inductive and deductive arguments to evaluate their validity, soundness, strength, and weakness. Identify what is acceptable and unacceptable level of vagueness. 6, understand and apply skills for writing effective arguments. 7, analyze group thinking styles and their influence on decisions. 8, understand decision-making tools and techniques. 9, identify and define the problem. Analyze, understand, and frame the problem. 10, Analyze solutions to a problem and evaluate different decision-making tools. 11. Apply critical thinking and decision-making to a situation. Evaluate ethical decisions that affect the stakeholders. 12. Determine critical thinking challenges. In the thinking process, understand factors that affect decisions in an organization. 13. Analyze challenges, resources, and actions needed for effective decisions. 14. Analyze stakeholder needs and ethical implications. 15. Evaluate and identify the patterns necessary to make good decisions. 16. Identify ethics issues in business involving integrity, objectivity, and independence. 17. Apply decision-making tools, techniques, and critical thinking. 18. Evaluate the implications of the decision-making process and its outcomes. Our textbook here is going to be the 12th edition by Moore and Parker. It's 2017, 12th edition. That's the newest one. There's older editions as well. And the book is from the publisher called McGraw-Hill Education. The price if you buy it from McGraw-Hill will be $85.68. After I go over the syllabus with you, I'll show you Amazon, where you can buy this book that's used, if you choose to do so. We also have recommended reading, which you might have to use as a reference also in this course, and it's critical thinking tools for taking charge of your learning and your life. We also will have other readings discussed in these Zooms, and those will be provided for you. If you would like more information on the online resources, you can check out your proxy, Learn at Grace University. You could also check out the publishing lib, textbooks, and also the press books. Yes, there are course requirements and an assessment. This course will be conducted online on a 10-week schedule aligned with the Grace University's academic calendar for a total of 40 instructional hours. Students are required to work with the material, with peers, and with the instructor regularly through the online discussions, reading, videos, and other assignments that promote active learning. In addition, there will be highly encouraged class meeting opportunities at least once a semester. Regular communication with the instructor and the other students in class is mandatory. We have weekly readings. The chapter or pages required are offered in the syllabus. And we have forum discussions. There are 10 discussions total. It's worth 30% of your final grade. The instructor will ask you 1 or 2 questions about the topic each week. Students will need to post the initial post by Thursday midnight and then post substantial and meaningful comments to the other peers by Sunday midnight. So it's 3 points times 10 equals 30 points. The purpose of the forum discussion posts and responses is to the process of the assigned academic materials, both reading and video presentations, and allow students to practice the theoretical argumentation and reflection. Discussion posts should demonstrate critical thinking as students respectfully respond to challenging questions. It must reflect each week's lectures and course materials. Responding by simply saying, that was good, or I agree, without giving the reasons behind the comment will not receive maximum points. Students are required to cite their sources. That's in-text citations and through the works cited section. So if you mention somebody's name, make sure you reference it also in the reference section, not just in the in-text citations, and vice versa. Please make sure you're using APA format for all your weekly assignments, whether this is our discussion or the assignment. There's some guidelines for the protocols for your forum discussion. You must read the topic carefully and understand the question. Initial post. Initial post should consist of 250 to 350 words. Your initial response must include your main opinion. Personal observations and viewpoints should be supported with the evidence from the research, including course materials, paraphrase, or direct quotes. You must include APA formatted in text or parenthetical citations, plus a works cited section in your post. The minimum word count requirement does not include question prompts and the works cited section. Remember, Thursday midnight is your initial post due date. Responses. 2 responses posts should include and consist of 150 to 200 words. After posting your initial post, you must respond to 2 fellow students posting by offering a substantive critique or response to them. These are 2 separate responses. Response posts should be meaningful and substantive. Consider developing various counterparts and supportive perspectives that pose a challenge, a critique, or a question to the original post. 2 responses are due Sunday at midnight. Missing the deadline will automatically lead to the loss of points. It's very important to know that the forum submissions are to be academic in nature, based on careful study of the assigned materials, lecture, video, readings, rather than personal sharing, although a brief personal sharing, when relevant, is permitted in case it is part of the academic discussion. Check your postings for responses from others and respond in kind. Stay focused on the topic. Grading criteria for an initial and responsive post. Fullness and breadth of the discussion. Length and terminology. Writing skills, grammar and organization. Timelines. Referred to grading rubrics. Okay, so you want to get full points on your discussion. Make sure that you have the fullness and the breadth of your initial post. That should have evidence of an understanding of the question and critical exploration with analysis and expanded ideas, major viewpoints, and good knowledge base presented. Fullness and breadth response post, substantive critique, or response to at least 2 peers. Represented various counterpoints or supportive perspectives that pose a challenge, critique, or question to the original post with the utmost respect. Length of terminology, extensive use of reference and reading to support ideas with enhanced vocabulary and application. Initial post is 200 to 250 words. Response post is 100 to 150 words. Writing skills, grammar, and organization. Discussion posts were written with great care, with correct grammar and punctuations. While the posts are written using the first-person language, students use academic and scholarly language. MLA writing and formatting style. So make sure you're using APA. If you have permission to use MLA because you're a different major, then let us know. But if you're a business major, you should be using APA. The grading breakdown and final grade. We have presentation. It's 100 points. And that's worth 10%. Then we have our forum discussion. 300 points is 30%. Weekly assignments, 600, 60%, and total 1,000 is 100%. We have 100 to 94 is an A. If you have 93 to 91 is A minus. A B would be 90 to 88. That's a B plus. A regular B would be 87 to 84%. A B minus would be 83 to 81%. A C plus would be 80 to 78%. And a C is 77 to 74%. And a C minus is 73 to 71%. If you get below a 70, that's a D. If you get below 65%, then that is an F, and that is fail. Course policies. Instructional methodology. This course will follow a lecture, a video, forum discussion format. Weekly forum discussion will be provided, which highlights each topic. The discussion topic covers understanding of the topic and the integration of theory and practice in the real world. Students will be required to complete reading assignments each week. Lecture videos and additional materials offered by the instructor. Active student engagement and participation in class activities are encouraged and will enhance the overall learning. Submission requirements: no late work will be accepted. No grade or assignment negotiation or substitution will be permitted. Students are responsible for all due dates regardless of their attendance. All your submission needs to be made on Populi. All assignments, unless otherwise announced, must be submitted to the designated area of Populi. Do not submit assignment via email. Assignment due dates follow the specific times. And you can click on the link to access your time converter to ensure that your account is the Pacific Standard Time, in case it's a different time zone. Okay, so this week we're looking at week 1. As you can see, every week we have a topic. This week is critical thinking basics. You will be required to read these various chapters. You're going to be reading chapter 1, Don't Believe Everything You Think, Critical Thinking by Moore. And then we have Thinking in a World of Accelerating Change, Intensifying Danger, Critical Thinking Tools by Paul and Elder. Remember, in this course, you have 2 books. So they're both going to be chapter 1. And then our discussion this week will be for you to write down, what does critical thinking mean to you, and can you give some examples? Remember, it should be 200 to 300 words. And our assignment is for you to locate supplemental materials on page 14 of the syllabus and find the decision-making tools worksheet. You may have to copy and paste this worksheet into your own document. And fill out the definitions, explain what you would use, the specific tool or technique, and don't forget to submit it. Okay, as I told you, I was going to show you where you can purchase the book. As you can see, if you want to get a hardback loose leaf copy from Amazon Prime, it would be $129. 73 cents to $133.15, depending on where you live. You might get it free delivery or you might have to pay. It depends what type of Prime you have and where you're located in the United States or beyond. You can see we have some used ones, and those are starting at $17.59. A paperback here is $23.96. So, the first integrated program designed specifically for the critical thinking course, Moore Parker's critical thinking teaches students the skills they need in order to think for themselves, skills they will call upon in this course, in other college courses, and the world that awaits. The author's practical and accessible approach illustrates core concepts with concrete real world examples, extensive practice exercises, and a thoughtful set of pedagogical features. Connect and learn smart for critical thinking facilitates a highly adaptive learning environment where each student gets the targeted help he or she needs for more efficient mastery of course concepts. So let's go over our chapter 1. Chapter 1, Critical Thinking. Why is it important? The aim of this tutorial is to help you learn the basics of critical thinking and be able to identify common barriers to effective critical thought. Critical thinking, a vital skill. Critical thinking provides us with a crucial set of skills we need to make decisions and resolve issues that arise in our everyday lives. Critical thinking, like logic, requires learning how to think rather than simply what to think. The word critical is derived from the Greek word katharsis, which means discernment, the ability to judge or decision making. There are some good examples in the past of some psychological tests and critical thinking. And one of them is the Milgram experiment. If you're not sure about this experiment, we'll be watching a little video today explaining what the Milgram experiment was. Who was involved? Who were the test subjects? Logic. Logic is a crucial part of critical thinking, and it requires good analytical skills. Logic is defined as a study of methods and principles used in distinguishing correct good arguments from incorrect bad arguments. Critical thinking requires applying the rules of logic as well as gathering evidence, evaluating it, and coming up with a plan of action. Logic versus opinion. In contrast to arguments based on logic, arguments based on opinion are defined as beliefs, basically solely on personal feelings rather than reason or facts. While we are all entitled to our own opinions, arguments based solely on opinions are not necessarily reasonable and may encourage us to make poor choices or act in ways we may later regret. Sometimes uninformed opinions can be harmful, both to us and to society. Cognitive development in college students. Educational researcher Perry Jr., 1913 to 1998, identified several stages of cognitive development in college students. Later, researchers simplified his findings into 3 separate developmental stages: dualism, relativism, and commitment. Dualism is a first stage of cognitive development and is common among freshmen and many sophomores. It involves the assimilation of knowledge and experience in a simple dualistic way. Viewing issues as either right or wrong, dualistic thinkers see knowledge existing outside themselves and look to authority figures for answers. While researching an issue, dualistic students often exhibit confirmation bias, which involves only seeking out evidence that supports their views and dismissing or ignoring contrary evidence. Rather than accepting the ambiguity may be unavoidable. Relativistic thinkers reject the dualistic viewpoint and move to the opposite extreme, arguing that all truth is relative or just a matter of opinion. People at this stage believe that stating one's opinion is the proper form of communication, and they look down on challenging others' opinions as judgmental or even disrespectful. Despite their outward relativism, they still look to authority figures such as professors to confirm their opinions. Oops, we got a little commercial break. Okay. Step 3, commitment. As students mature, they come to realization that not all thinking is equally valid. Not only can authority figures be mistaken, but a certain level of uncertainty and ambiguity is unavoidable. When students at this stage experience uncertainty, they are now able to make decisions and commitment to particular positions on the basis of reason and the best evidence available. At the same time, as the independent thinkers, they are open to challenge and are flexible enough to change their positions as new evidence becomes available. Characteristics of a good critical thinker. Critical thinking is a collection of skills that enhance and reinforce each other. Analytical skills, your ability to analyze and provide logical support for your beliefs. Communication and reading skills, your ability to listen, speak, and write effectively, and awareness of your own communication style. Research and inquiry skills, your ability to gather, evaluate, and synthesize supporting evidence. Flexibility and tolerance of ambiguity, the ability to have flexibility to adapt to changing situations. Characteristics of good critical thinker. Flexibility and tolerance of ambiguity, the ability to flexibly adapt to changing situations. Open-mindedness, open-minded skepticism, the ability to overcome personal prejudice and bias and critically examine an issue before coming to decision. This often involves the method of doubt, first proposed by the French philosopher René Descartes in 1596 to 1650. Method of doubt involves setting aside our preconceptions and adopting a default position of skepticism. There's René Descartes now. Characteristics of a good critical thinker. Creative problem-solving skills, the ability to view problems from multiple perspectives, come up with original solutions to complex problems. Attentiveness, mindfulness, and curiosity. The ability to remain curious and attentive to the world and consider multiple opinions. Collaborative learning skills, the ability to recognize and anticipate the reactions of others, and a willingness to collaborate with others to share and gain knowledge. Here's an example right here. Multiple potentially deadly EF3 tornadoes causing millions of dollars of damage. An MP3 player. we have critical thinking and self-development. Critical thinking is not just about abstract thought. It's about self-improvement and your whole development as a person. Self-examination is an important part of this process. Good critical thinkers take charge of their lives and choices. By contrast, poor critical thinkers allow themselves to be controlled by circumstances and often deal ineffectively with problems, which often results in depression, anger, or other emotional problems. Developing a rational life plan is an effective way of avoiding these problems. Age differences and depression. Age differences in depression. We have 12-month prevalence of major depressive episodes among U.S. adults, 2016. You have overall female, male. Then we have some other ones, which is the age groups 18 to 25, 26 to 49, 50 plus. Then you have the race groups. You have Hispanics, whites, blacks, Asians. Then you have the NHOPs, which are Native, Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islanders. Then you have the AUAN, which is the American, Indian, Alaska Natives. A life plan is like a flight plan. Yes, you can start a life plan. A lot of people like to do vision maps or like goal sheets. Some people like the vision maps. They like to write down their goals. Other features of a good critical thinker. Effective critical thinkers exhibit these traits and characteristics. These include the ability to challenge social justices, as well as being able to respond intelligently and thoroughly to the challenges to our own belief systems. The cultivation of high self-esteem, proactive attitude, and self-direction. Traits common in anonymous critical thinking, the development of democratic politics, and the ability to critically analyze political actors and issues. We have King. He was willing to go to jail rather than to back down of his goal of equality for all people. And of course, he was even willing to risk his life, which he did. You have Sally Ride. You have Elizabeth Cady Stanton. There's just some names getting dropped. We have barriers to effective critical thinking. Effective critical thinking involves sharpening our resistance to irrational and narrow-minded arguments. We're recognizing these irrational and narrow-minded arguments can sharpen our own critical thinking skills and help devise effective strategies to counter them. Prisoners of Guantanamo Bay, that's another issue. A lot of us are advocates for human rights and a right for all. Even somebody on death row has a right to live. In the United States, we have a right to a fair and just trial. No one should be proven guilty. Everyone should be innocent before their trial. That's the logic behind the human rights. You have Tiananmen Square. That was a famous one in history. If you're not sure, then maybe you should look at your history books again. But that is about the shooting in Tiananmen Square. The three-tier model of thinking. The processes used in critical thinking can be broken down into 3 tiers or levels: experience, interpretation, and analysis. Experience. The foundational level of critical thinking involves firsthand experience as well as empirical facts derived from other sources. Interpretation involves trying to make sense of our experiences. Analysis involves raising our level of thinking and critically analyzing our interpretations of the experience. There are 3 levels of thinking. The bottom level is experience. The second one is interpretation, and the top one is analysis. And that has to do with resistance. Resistance. None of us likes to be wrong when we are challenged. We often exhibit resistance, which is defined as the use of immature defense mechanisms that are rigid, impulsive, maladaptive, and non analytical. Resistance acts as a barrier to effective critical thinking. There are several types of resistance. They include avoidance, anger, cliches, denial, ignorance, conformity, struggling, and distractions. Avoidance involves escaping or intentionally avoiding certain people and situations. Anger involves responding to challenges with threatening physical or verbal cues. Cliches are often repeated statements that sidetrack the real issues and prevent effective critical thought. Denial involves ignoring or refuting challenging viewpoints or evidence. Ignorance is a type of resistance where we intentionally avoid learning about a particular use. Conformity involves going along with the group or peer viewpoints, even when you disagree with them. Struggling involves getting so caught up in the minute details of an issue that nothing gets accomplished. Distractions are hindrances that prevent clear thinking and effective critical analysis. Is ignorance bliss? Good question. What do you think? Narrow mindedness. Like resistance, narrow mindedness, and rigid beliefs, such as absolutism, egoism, the fear of challenge, ethnocentrism, and ethnocentrism. That has to do with the what? Anthropology. And act as barriers to effective critical thinking. Absolutism is a perspective that sees the world in black and white absolutes. Fear of a challenge involves reluctance to stand up to others who believe they have different opinions. We have egocentrism, a perspective that sees the self as the center of all things. Ethnocentrism is an uncritical or unjustified belief in the inherent superiority of one's own group or culture. Anthropism is a belief that humans are central or most significant entity in the universe. We have a statue of Buddha. We think of Buddha, we think of peace. According to the Buddha's teachings, mental hindrances like distractions keep from clear understanding. We have Stephen Hawking. Even though Stephen Hawking was disabled and he had trouble communicating, people couldn't understand his speech, so he communicated through his keyboard. And he also couldn't walk, so he has a wheelchair coupled with transportation. But he was always critical thinking. He was always thinking about the end of the universe, how math and science formulas could be solved. Funeral of Sun Sen. So most cultures have a funeral. We give our respect to those who have passed away. Rationalize it and double think. When we are faced with difficult choices or decisions, we often engage in rationalization to justify our decisions, made on the basis of personal opinions or bias. Because rationalization involves ignoring competing claims, people who engage in it are often get caught up in doublethink. It's defined as holding the two contrary beliefs, views, or double standards at the same time and believing both to be true. Cognitive and social distances. We are most likely to modify or critically analyze our views when we encounter cognitive or social dissonance, which occurs when we encounter new ideas or social behavior that contradicts or conflicts with our world views. Evidence suggests that when people change their behavior, changes in the beliefs follow. This right here is the U.S. median income by race, ethnicity, and gender in 2017. So if you look right here, it looks like Hispanic women earn less than half of what white men earn. You don't have to be mad. This is just from 2017 if you want to see some comparisons. You have Asian Americans that are making over 56,000 or 67,000. White, about 60,000. Asian, 55,000. Then you have white women. Then below that you have Black. Then Hispanic. Then Black women and Hispanic women. The wage gap between women and men, especially between white and Asian men and Black and Hispanic women, continues to be significant, with women earning about 80% of what men earn. As explored in the previous slides, effective critical thinking requires development of the collection of skills, including alternativeness, open-mindedness, strong communication, and effective analytical research and problem-solving skills. Critical thinking also needs to be aware of the barriers to the effective critical thinking, such as habitual use of resistance and different kinds of narrow-mindedness. College perspectives on affirmative action college admissions. Don't get it? End up like me? I'll tell them said something. Tell them I said something. Okay. So it's kind of hard to read her sign, but that's what it says. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the video of Milgram's experiment. Over the years, they've done similar studies. This is a Milgram experiment.
Low ink? Already? Cartridges!
Don't get cartridged. Switch to the cartridge-free Epson EcoTank. Prints up to 5,000 pages. Switch at EpsonEcoTank.com. Just fill it, Joe!
Dude, you coming?
Because the only thing dripping should be your style. Plop Plop Fizz Fizz with Alka-Seltzer Plus cold and flu relief. Also try for fizzy fast cough relief.
How can a regular person be talked into committing heinous acts upon another? And could you be convinced to potentially injure or kill someone else? I'm not talking about self-defense or during war on the battlefield, but someone you have never met before and have had no interaction with previously. How can perfectly normal people commit genocide? Like what we saw in the 1930s and 1940s in Europe, or even in Cambodia in the 1970s, amongst other events. What causes people to be active participants in crimes against humanity? If we take Germany in the 1930s as an example, what caused a large part of a modern country to be willing in crimes against people that have been their neighbours and community members for years? It is a really fascinating thought experiment, as when you think to yourself, I could never do something like this, or even this. But what would it actually take for you to pull a trigger, push a button, or pull a lever? Well, this is where a psychologist set out to see what would be the minimum amount of suggestion for a regular person to administer a potentially deadly electric shock to someone they have never met before. The simple but effective study would be known by the inventor's name, the Milgram experiment. The actual experiment would not result in any physical pain, but extreme stress and inflicted insight to the participants. And this would create controversy with the study. As such, I'm going to rate it here 5 on my ethics scale. This is mainly due to it being a fascinating dive into our hardwired ability to obey an authority figure, even to the point of murder. Welcome to the dark side of science. Stanley Milgram was an American social psychologist born on the 15th of August 1933 in the Bronx, New York. His parents were Jewish and had fled Romania and Hungary during the First World War.
Okay, so there's a little background on him. You can see what happened in the old days. Okay, this is the experiment on obedience.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in a laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area. They were obtained by a newspaper advertisement and direct mail solicitation. The subjects range in occupation from corporation presidents to good humormen and plumbers, and in educational level from one who had not finished elementary school to subjects who have doctorate and other professional degrees.
The other. Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Teacher. All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so that he can get some sort of punishment. So, learner, would you step out here with me, please? Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
No, but I think I should say this. About 2 years ago, I was at the Veterans Hospital in West Haven.
Mm-hmm.
And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
No, that's all.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 75 volts.
Oh.
Soft hair. He kind of did some yelling in there.
Continue, please.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts. Hard head. Just how far can you go in this thing?
As far as is necessary.
What do you mean as far as is necessary?
To complete the test. We'll find all the words first. Please continue.
I sure don't know the effect of this thing, and I'm a little skeptical about electricity.
The experiment requires that you go on, teacher. Please continue.
Incorrect. 150 volts.
Oh,
Sad face.
experimenter. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please.
Continue.
My heart's starting to
Continue,
bother me.
teacher.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Look, I don't know anything about electricity. I don't profess any knowledge, nor will I go any further until I find out if the guy's okay.
It's absolutely essential that you continue.
Well, essential or not, this program isn't quite that important to me that I should go along doing something that I know nothing about, particularly if it's going to injure someone.
Wrong. It's hair. 75 volts, Jim.
Oh.
You know.
Yeah. Please continue.
Cool. Wrong. It's head. 105 volts. I don't know. Wet. Wrong. It's horse. 150 volts.
Oh. Experimenter. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Continue, teacher, please. Go on. The next word is sad.
Well, I'm not going on if he refuses to do it.
The experiment requires that you go on, teacher.
If he refuses, I won't.
Whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word
Take the check back. I'm not going to hurt the guy.
No, the check's not the issue. It's absolutely essential that you continue.
Well, he don't want to. I refuse to.
Wrong. Volts. 135. Answer woman.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck, music. Answer, please. Wrong. 195 volts. Dance.
The experiment requires that you
I know
continue.
it does, but that man is hollering in there, sir.
As I said before, although the shocks may be painful,
Yeah,
they're not
but I mean,
dangerous.
he's yelling in there.
Start with blue, please, at the top of the page. Continue, please, teacher.
What do I tell him? We're going over it again?
No, just go ahead.
Blue. Boy. Girl, grass, hat. Correct. Nice. Day, sky, job, chair.
If in this study, an anonymous experimenter could successfully command adults to subdue a 50-year-old man and force on him painful electric shocks against his protests, one can only wonder what government, with its vastly greater authority and prestige, can command of its subjects.
Okay, so what did you think about that? Pretty interesting, right?
We tried everything, but Charlie still struggled with math. Then another mom recommended
Okay, this is psychology of tyranny. Did Milgram get it wrong?
So the title of my talk this morning is Mindless Conformity or Engaged Followership. And that's a question that relates to the way in which we want to think about the nature of tyranny, why people abuse other people, why they torture them, why they oppress them. If you know anything about the psychology of that subject, it's probably through the lens of some classic psychological studies that were conducted in the early 1960s by Stanley Milgram at Yale University. In those, he invited normal residents, citizens of New Haven, to come into his laboratory to participate in a study ostensibly of memory and learning. The participants were told that their task was to administer shocks, electric shocks, to another person every time they made an error on a learning task, supposedly to see whether they would perform better after having been given the shocks. In fact, Milgram was interested in not memory and learning, but actually destructive obedience. Would the participants obey these toxic instructions that administer shocks increasing in 15-volt intervals all the way to 450 volts? And the answer, as I'm sure you all know, is yes. In the standard what's come to be known as the standard baseline study, 65% of the participants went all the way to the end of the scale, being prepared to administer potentially lethal shocks to another person simply because they had been asked to do so by another person in a science experiment. Now, when Milgram was trying to explain what was going on in his research, he looked around, and it so happened that at exactly the same moment in history, Adolf Eichmann was being tried in Jerusalem. Eichmann understood and recognized as the chief architect of the Holocaust. And he looked to in particular to one account of Eichmann's trial by Hannah Arendt, in which she observed that whereas previously psychiatrists had imagined that because he was, if you like, guilty of, had been such a massive perpetrator of such a massively scaled atrocity, that Eichmann must be a perverted, sadistic, deeply pathological individual. But what Arendt observed was that actually Eichmann came across as a thoroughly normal, effectively uninspiring career civil servant. And she argued that he'd done what he had done simply because he had been asked to do so. And he had responded to his instructions, his orders, mechanically, unimaginatively, unquestioningly. And her argument was that the real frightening lesson of Eichmann's life and crimes was, as she termed it, the fearsome, word and thought-defying banality of evil. Eichmann was not a monster, he was just someone who in a very, very normal way went about administering horror to millions of people without thought. And for Milgram, of course, he saw the connection with his own participants, and he said that Arendt's conception of the banality of evil comes closer to the truth than one might dare imagine. The ordinary person who shocked the person did so out of a sense of obligation, a conception of his duties as a subject, and not from any peculiarly aggressive tendencies. The core message here then is that tyranny and oppression thrive because perpetrators conform thoughtlessly and mindlessly to authority. If someone asks us to do it, we just get on with it, we don't ask why. And that has really become the dominant model of evil, tyranny and oppression for the last 50 years. It's invoked pretty much routinely to explain everything from abuse at Abu Ghraib, corruption in Enron, or everyday terrorist atrocities around the world. And I'm sure it's an analysis that you're deeply familiar with through various kinds of channels, academic, journalistic, and just by being an active member of society. However, recently a number of people have started to question that analysis. It started in particular with the work of historians who went back over the details of the lives of Nazi perpetrators like Eichmann and argued that the banality of evil analysis did not stack up. This is a statement from Lozovich in the book Hitler's Bureaucrats. Eichmann and his ilk did not come to murder Jews by accident, nor by blindly following orders, or in a fit of absent-mindedness, or by being small cogs in a big machine. They worked hard, thought hard, took the lead over many years. They were the alpinists of evil. Ian Kershaw, the British historian, looking at the dynamics of the Nazi state, argues that what was going on there was not obedience to authority or the obeying of orders. Rather, it was a process he describes as working towards the Führer, where committed Nazis who believed in the Nazi cause asked themselves, what is it that my leader, the Führer, would want me to do in this situation? What's appropriate in order for me to realize my little bit of contribution to the big Nazi project? Now, the question that my colleagues and I, and in particular Steve Reicher at the University of St Andrews, have asked is, might the same process of working towards a leader, or perhaps working towards an experimenter, explain what's going on in the Milgram paradigm and other similar studies? And what I want to do in the time left to me is to suggest that yes, that is indeed what is going on. And our analysis suggests that what underlies participants' willingness to administer shocks is not blind conformity, but actually engaged followership, in which people respond enthusiastically and with commitment and a certain amount of imagination to not so much the instructions, but the vision of leaders. And there are 4 lines of evidence which really speak to this, and that I'm going to go through very quickly. The first draws on a little known but actually core fact about Milgram's research, which is that he didn't just conduct one study. His program was comprised of around 30. And if you look at those studies, what you see is that the level of obedience that was displayed in them varied dramatically. In some studies, all of the participants were prepared to go all the way to 450 volts, and in some of them, none did. So the obvious question is what explains this variability? And more particularly, it doesn't seem like a natural process that people just do what they're told, because they were always told the same thing. Instead, they're responsive to some contextual cues. What might those be? Well, Steve and I, in our research, the starting point was to give people like yourselves details of those variants and ask them to what extent a particular variant encourages participants to identify with the experimenter and their science, their scientific project, or alternatively to identify with the learner. That's variability in obedience across the different variants, from very high to very low. And what you see, if you look at patterns of predicted identification with the experimenter, is that those map very closely onto those levels of obedience. On the other hand, identification with the learner, the victim, goes in the opposite direction and is negatively correlated with obedience. And again, this is, or interestingly, this is something that Milgram's own insights at the time that he was conducting the study suggest was very much going through his own mind. He said, the subjects have come to the laboratory to form a relationship with the experimenter, a specifically submissive relationship in the interest of advancing science. They have not come to form a relationship with the victim. And it is this lack of a relationship in the one direction and the real relationship with the experimenter in the other that explains the results. In other words, participants obey, if you want to call it that, we don't actually, but not because they identify with the experimenter and do not identify with the learner. This is something that we've explored in other research by looking at how people respond to prompts that they're given by the experimenter in the event that they turn out to be reluctant to continue administering shocks. When that happens, the experimenter gives them a series of 4 predetermined prods. The first is, please continue. The second is, the experiment requires that you continue. If they still don't want to go on, he says it's absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, he says, you have no other choice, you must continue. Now, what's interesting about that is that of those prods, only one is a direct order. It's the last one. Okay. So if the Milgram studies are about obeying orders, what you should see is that that prod is particularly effective. But actually what you find is exactly the opposite. In Milgram's own research and in replications of it, you find that when that last prod is given, not a single participant obeys it. So when people are told, ordered to do something, they say, no, I'm not going to. So ironically, and it's a pretty profound irony, the one thing that the Milgram studies are understood as showing is the one thing that they don't show. When people are ordered to do something, they actually don't. And this is something that we've looked at in some additional research of ours, in which we've actually controlled the prods more systematically in a sort of rigorous experimental design. And what you see there, again, is that the final prod is particularly unsuccessful. It's not a very good strategy, okay? Why is it unsuccessful? The argument, we suggest, is because it positions the experimenter as someone who is working against or not with the participant. It suggests that they are using power over them rather than engaging in a collaborative, cooperative enterprise. What is the prod that's most successful? Well, it's the one that says the experiment requires that you continue. Why is that successful? Because it appeals to an identity-related activity that the experimenter and the participant share, an interest in advancing science. This is something in a third stream of research we've investigated by manipulating identification with the experimenter and with science directly. Okay, so we have a control condition, but we also have a high identification condition in which we say to people, list 3 things that you think are important about science, that you like about science, that you have in common with scientists. And we have a low identification condition. List 3 things that you find problematic about science, that you dislike about science, and that differentiate you from scientists. Well, what you see is that in the high identification, and like the control condition, actually about 50% of participants go all the way to the final instruction. They show total obedience, if you like. But in the low identification condition, actually their willingness to do so is dramatically reduced. In that condition, only about, or fewer than 10% of people go to the end. Final piece of evidence is, okay, this is conjecture or experimental work after the fact. In recent years, we've gone back into Milgram's archives at Yale to see if there's any sense that what I'm talking about now was what was actually going on there. And what you see, going through Milgram's notebooks, I've given you some of that information already, but also details of the transcripts of the studies and so on, is that actually Milgram, as a sort of leader of the scientific enterprise, went to great lengths to encourage identification on the part of participants with his project. So he bigged up the science in order to encourage engagement with his mission, his task, his experimental activities. He spent a very long time honing the shock apparatus, for example, to make it look like a really impressive piece of engineering equipment. And when the participants turned up to the lab, he gave them a big story about how important what they were doing was for science. But actually we know very little about the effect of punishment on learning, he said, because almost no truly scientific studies have been made of it in human beings. So by participating in this research, you're doing a great thing for science. And this is, I think, the most telling piece of evidence that we've uncovered. It's in box 44 in the Milgram archive, which is there's masses of material, and it is the transcripts of participants' post-experimental responses. How did they feel when they found at the end of the study that they had actually been prepared to kill somebody in the name of science? Well, everybody here thinks they must have felt like, well, pretty crappy, okay? That must have been a terrible thing, and they must have been embarrassed, to say the least, but they might have felt pretty rotten. Well, actually, far from it. Because what you see there is that participants weren't really distressed at all. On the contrary, they were actually pretty happy. Why? Because in the debriefing, Milgram had explained to them that they had made a major contribution to science through their efforts. And they had the sense that they had made this big contribution to a cutting-edge piece of science. More particularly, rather than thinking, I've done something wrong, Milgram in his debriefing explained to them that they'd actually done a wonderful thing. And they had no sense of having done anything wrong. Yes, delivering shocks to other people was unpleasant, and at the time they would rather not have had to do it. But ultimately they felt happy because through their willingness to stick with the task, they had proved themselves to be worthy, good subjects. This is one participant's responses. Briefly, I am happy to have been of service. The money was donated to the Cancer Fund. You see, my interest lay in being of service. Continue your experiments by all means, as long as good can come of them. In this crazy mixed up world of ours, every bit of good is needed. So the participants, far from thinking they'd done something terrible, thought they'd done something wonderful. That is frightening. That is shocking. And actually that, I think, is the most alarming element of Milgram's research. So to conclude, what I want to say is tyranny isn't a product of natural or blind obedience. This is something that Milgram himself recognized. Even in this experiment, we must disguise the character of obedience so that it appears to serve a productive end. Therefore, we are not dealing with blind obedience, he said. It's ironic, of course, that he wrote that in his notebooks, and that's absolutely not what people understand his research as saying. Indeed, it probably isn't obedience at all. Rather, it's engaged followership that's predicated upon identification with those in authority whose cause is believed to be right and who are followed on this basis. And the final point there, then, is if you look at tyranny around the world, what makes people willing to abuse, to tyrannize, to oppress, to torture other people? Well, the first thing to note is it is very hard work. It requires energy, application, and enthusiasm. It isn't something that you sleepwalk into like a zombie. No, it's hard work, and ultimately, perpetrators are people who do what they do because they see it to be a labor of love.
All right. Okay, it's a 10-minute break song. Go and take your break. Welcome back from the break. Okay, welcome back from the break. So at this point, you should have an understanding a little bit about critical thinking and why it's important to you. Let's get into the book now. The first one, what is critical thinking anyway? It's good thinking. Okay. What is critical thinking anyways? A little bigger for you. How's that? Is that better now? Okay. Great. So if you attend a university, we'd bet that you'd hear a lot about critical thinking. Perhaps you want to hear your professors telling you how important it is or how dismayed they are there isn't more of it in today's world. Unfortunately, you may not be entirely sure what exactly it is that they think is lacking. If you listen to the whole, or you listen for a while, you get an idea that whatever it is, all your professors are certain they emphasize it in their courses. You may even get an idea that for many of them, critical thinking is mainly just whatever it is that they happen to teach: sociology, history, business, communication, or whatever. So you're going to have critical thinking in there. Is there any common ground among educators about what critical thinking is? Yes. Most educators probably agree that a person who jumps to conclusion or makes ill-formed, indefensible, knee-jerking decisions has not thought critically. A hold back while we read about a teenager who was spotted shoplifting. The police were called and arrested the young man. While they were reading him his rights, he shook out of their grasp and made a run for it. Unfortunately, as he made his break, his huge trousers ripped him, and that was the end of his getaway. Everyone will agree that trying to run from the police, especially when your pants are on the ground, is not thinking well, let alone thinking critically. This may seem like an unimportant or frivolous example, but it really is not much different in principle from signing on a mortgage payments that are more than you earn. Or if you are a mortgage broker in an insurance company, betting that people who do not are willing to manage the trick. What then is critical thinking? Clearly, it involves more than just blindly acting or reacting. Every educator will concede that critical thinking aims at making wise decisions and coming to the correct conclusions and not being waylaid by temptation, emotion, greed, irrelevant conclusions, stupidity, bias, or other similar things. To refine this a bit, on the other hand, there is good old-fashioned thinking. That's what we do when we form opinions or judgments, make decisions, arrive at conclusions, and the like. On the other hand, there's critical thinking, and that's what we do when we critique the first kind of thinking. Subject it about thinking. We engage in it when we consider whether our thinking for someone else abides by the criteria of good sense and logic. Okay, go ahead and go to the next section. Critical thinking, the long version. You can have some kind of little checklist for yourself, like they have here. We have the judges critique dancers on Dancing with the Stars, but that doesn't automatically qualify as thinking critically. Then they might call them the think team. This is a picture of rescue team in action, not thinking critically about your decision on ski in avalanche conditions can have grave consequences. Thinking about thinking. A subjective statement is made true by someone's thinking about it as being true. Does this mean that statements about what somebody is thinking are subjective? The answer is no, though it may take a second to see it. Take this statement, Joni's thinking of moving. What makes the statement true? If it is not Jones thinking that statement is true, what makes it true is Joni is thinking of moving. The statement is about what someone is thinking, and an objective statement about what is going on in the person's mind. Moral subjectivism. Arguments. Time for another video. Here are some tips to improve your critical thinking by Samantha Ogos of TED.
Tourists. Tourists that turn into scientists. Tourists taking photos that are analyzed by AI. So researchers can help life underwater flourish.
Every day, a sea of decisions stretches before us. Some are small and unimportant, but others have a larger impact on our lives. For example, which politician should I vote for? Should I try the latest diet craze? Or will email make me a millionaire? We're bombarded with so many decisions that it's impossible to make a perfect choice every time. But there are many ways to improve our chances, and one particularly effective technique is critical thinking. This is a way of approaching a question that allows us to carefully deconstruct a situation, reveal its hidden issues, such as bias and manipulation, and make the best decision. If the critical part sounds negative, that's because, in a way, it is. Rather than choosing an answer because it feels right, a person who uses critical thinking subjects all available options to scrutiny and skepticism. Using the tools at their disposal, they'll eliminate everything but the most useful and reliable information. There are many different ways of approaching critical thinking, but here's one 5-step process that may help you solve any number of problems. 1. Formulate your question. In other words, know what you're looking for. This isn't always as straightforward as it sounds. For example, if you're deciding whether to try out the newest diet craze, your reasons for doing so may be obscured by other factors, like claims that you'll see results in just 2 weeks. But if you approach the situation with a clear view of what you're actually trying to accomplish by dieting, whether that's weight loss, better nutrition, or having more energy, that'll equip you to sift through this information critically, find what you're looking for, and decide whether the new fad really suits your needs. 2. Gather your information. There's lots of it out there, so having a clear idea of your question will help you determine what's relevant. If you're trying to decide on a diet to improve your nutrition, you may ask an expert for their advice or seek other people's testimonies. Information gathering helps you weigh different options, moving you closer to a decision that meets your goal. 3. Apply the information, something you do by asking critical questions. Facing a decision, ask yourself, what concepts are at work? What assumptions exist? Is my interpretation of the information logically sound? For example, in an email that promises you millions, you should consider, what is shaping my approach to this situation? Do I assume the sender is telling the truth? Based on the evidence, is it logical to assume I'll win any money? 4. Consider the implications. Imagine it's election time, and you've selected a political candidate based on their promise to make it cheaper for drivers to fill up on gas. At first glance, that seems great. But what about the long-term environmental effects? If gasoline use is less restricted by cost, this could also cause a huge surge in air pollution, an unintended consequence that's important to think about. 5. Explore other points of view. Ask yourself why so many people are drawn to the policies of the opposing political candidate. Even if you disagree with everything that candidate says, exploring the full spectrum of viewpoints might explain why some policies that don't seem valid to you appeal to others. This will allow you to explore alternatives, evaluate your own choices, and ultimately help you make more informed decisions. This 5-step process is just one tool, and it certainly won't eradicate difficult decisions from our lives, but it can help us increase the number of positive choices we make. Critical thinking can give us the tools to sift through a sea of information and find what we're looking for. And if enough of us use it, it has the power to make the world a more reasonable place.
All right, so that concludes today, and I will see you guys in our next meeting. Bye, everybody.